Hello, my name is Nives Wetzel de Cediel, and I am the Supervision and Field Placement Lead for Berkeley Educators for Equity and Excellence, which is the teacher education prep program at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Education. I'm also a lecturer in the program, and I have been a supervisor, lecturer, and co-director for, in different measures, for the last 10 years. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions that were posed to me to give a little background on the development of our current BE3 field supervision model. So let's see. So this is a working model of equity-centered and anti-racist field supervision. And these are the 4 questions that were posed to me. I won't answer them exhaustively, but I'm going to make an attempt to give some shape and rationale for our current model. The first question is, what was the catalyst for developing the onboarding PD and the reflective coaching and question protocol for supervisors at BE3? How did you begin making these changes? What are the different aspects of your PD and coaching for supervisors? Some of those are observation cycle plus the feedback form, our supervisor accountability, supervisors recording their debriefs, posing questions, readings, etc. And I was also asked to give a few examples of the focus of PD meetings. The third question, what evidence do you have that this approach has had an impact on supervisors and the quality and type of feedback they provide to student teachers? And what types of things do supervisors make note of and notice when watching other supervisors' debrief meetings? Any common themes that have arisen or big ahas for the supervisors receiving the feedback? So, the why and the how. In 2018, 3 professional programs for teacher prep at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Education became one program. So we had the English Pathway program, formerly known as MUSE. We had the Math Science, the STEM program, known as MaxMe. And we had the elementary education, the multiple subject credential, previously known as DTE. Those all came together under the umbrella of Berkeley Educators for Equity and Excellence. And when those 3 programs came together, there was a need to start to redefine what as one teacher prep program was going to be our identity, and in that identity, how that would drive the way we hired instructors, supervisors, how we thought about even the interview process for students entering into the program. So the BE3 identity statement was drafted, and we drafted that over a portion of the first summer of our BE3 coming together. And I pulled one section of our BE3 identity statement that's going to help foreground everything I'm going to say after it. But we knew that we needed something that all 3 programs would begin to form and reform themselves around. So this is just one excerpt from our BE3 identity statement that is currently on our website at the Graduate School of Education. Our work as teachers requires a profound recognition that schooling and education have been avenues for liberation, transformation, and justice, as well as oppression, colonization, and dehumanization. An awareness that demands that each moment of teaching is intentionally approached as political, ethical, and moral. In BE3, we embark on a continuous journey of naming and interrupting systems of oppression, including white supremacy, settler colonialism, patriarchy, and heteronormativity, and centering the knowledges, values, and experiences of marginalized communities. Knowing that power shapes what we teach, how we teach, and how we become as teachers and learners, we remind ourselves that washing our hands of conflicts in society is not neutrality. It is siding with systems of oppression. This is one excerpt from our current BE3 identity statement, but I thought it was important for me to share this with you to get just a small view into what we then began to use as a standard or a place to create some tension around why we do what we do and how we do it. So this BE3 identity statement was shared with existing supervisors, the supervisors that were there in the process of this transition. And I was at that time leading supervision, as I'm doing now, but we were in a place of transition. So gathering supervisors around a table in preliminary professional development, I was trying to do an assessment of how they resonated with the language of the BE3 identity statement. I also did that in conjunction with a colleague, Sonal Patel, who was working at the time on her EDD, and we decided to join ranks around a participant action research project. So she and I were working together to try to systematize a process for assessing where supervisors were, but where they needed to go, not only to meet the aspirations laid out in that BE3 identity statement, but to also meet the real pressing needs of the communities that we say we want to serve. So some of the things we found initially when engaging supervisors in conversation, and this was both conversation and also having supervisors at the time write their responses. Some of the things we pulled from a field supervisor's written reflections in 2019 were: the reason why I don't interrupt whiteness. I want to be liked. I want to protect my relationships with supervisees, not hurt feelings. I want to be nice. I don't want them to think I'm mean or too tough. I don't want to be seen as overbearing. I struggle balancing too direct and too nice, or not communicating anything really. I don't want to be a white woman telling teachers of color what works with students of color. So how did we even land on whiteness and white supremacy as a point to start? It was something that all of the supervisors were coming and talking about, but we were all in very, very different places. And now the catalyst seemed to be this BE3 identity statement. Some individuals really felt compelled and driven and inspired by the statement. Others found it problematic and were concerned that maybe the language was too strong. That's where we knew that was a place to start. Just getting into what were some of the sticking points or points of tension. And so talking about whiteness and white supremacy in educational spaces became primary in much of our preliminary PD supervision, supervisors PD, where we were trying to figure out who are we trying to be and what kind of training is this group going to need. So the question that Sonal Patel devised after many hours of us going through written and recorded statements and just anecdotal information collected from supervisors, we came up with this question: how are faculty and teacher education, particularly field supervisors, prepared to support pre-service teachers to challenge whiteness in education and build a more critical pedagogy with their pre-service teachers? So that was then the question that drove my construction of every monthly PD. And PD at that time was 3 hours once a month. This is a reading that we've used, one of many readings we use that is short, it's pithy, and it gets at the ethos of what Sonal and I were really trying to accomplish. And this is just a short quote from Paul Gorski's 2019 article. The hard truth is that racial equity cannot be achieved with an obsessive commitment to meeting people where they are, when where they are is fraught with racial bias and privilege. So then what we had is members of our team who were sitting in a place of naming that they felt uncomfortable with some of these hard pushes around disrupting whiteness and dispensing with the platitudes we often use when we're engaging with students. And we realized that if we're really going to get to racial equity and disrupting our own biases, we needed to be, everybody on board needed to be willing to do that hard personal work as well as do that difficult and worthwhile collective work. So we have the what. What were the things that I put in place to start to have a system in which there were some points that we could use as data points, things that could be put on a calendar, agendized, touch points for our supervision team, so that there was predictable, at least monthly, return to problems of practice, speaking specifically about what we were noticing with our particular load of students. And that came down to 3 basic categories of supervisor activity. Professional learning series for field supervisors. That included the monthly PD, but it also included seeking other forms of professional development or workshops that were speaking the language, had a demonstrated community impact, focused on hiring, retaining, working with communities of color, being able to being conversant in conversations of identity and diversity in really, really deep ways. So that was our professional learning series. We incorporated video self-analysis, and we tweaked a process that came out of the Harvard School of Education, using video not just for students to look at their own process, but we blew it up a little bit bigger, so that field supervisors would be recording themselves and doing self-analysis. So that was the second touch point. Finally, revamping the lesson observation cycle so that there was a written document that walked any supervisor through every step of what is expected in an observation cycle, all the way from the support and coaching with a student teacher while they're in the process of writing their lesson plan, so giving them written feedback in a Google Doc, to setting a calendar date in which that supervisor would come into their classroom and record a specified portion of their lesson. That specified portion would be identified by the student teacher based on the teaching performance expectations, and also specific places in their lesson where that TPE, we could look at that place in their lesson, and then based on what they said was their goal or their objective or their focus, we have a TPE centered goal for looking at some aspect of their practice. So we knew it wasn't effective anymore to record the entire observation, because very few people really go back and look at that. We needed to have a snapshot of something that the field supervisor and the student teacher could look at and really get granular around, so that we could hold a student teacher accountable to coming back with a next step for how do you build on what you did that looks like it's going in the right direction, or how can you shift and turn around a practice that was not working for students, that did not meet the goal that you set. So we have the 3 points, these 3 touch points: professional support and growth for field supervisors. So making a commitment and an investment in our field supervisors. And we have a video self-analysis process that student teachers have themselves recorded and are able to analyze their own teaching, and field supervisors concurrently are recording their debrief dialogues with the student teacher, and they go and review those. And what we're looking for is not just the goals we set based on the TPEs, or if we as supervisors are helping students get to where they said they wanted to go, but it gave us an opportunity to look at how are field supervisors speaking and responding to student teachers, and so that asked us to be hyper aware of our positionality and our identity. So through how we show up in our gender, and how we show up in our race, and how we show up in our language became really, really key to what we talk about, what we create as experiential process in our professional development. And the lesson observation cycle just meant that no one supervisor was out in the field inventing a process, because you'd only be able to invent a process based on what you think you know and what you think is important to know. So now we have a whole team of supervisors that we all follow literally a script. So that's a place where we can always come back to as our as our control. That there's through the video self-analysis, we should be able to look at a video and see that a supervisor in their debrief is referencing shared language that would be in a lesson plan, that they are going through the protocol as I wrote it for what a lesson observation cycle entails. And that meant that we had equity within the field supervisors. Expectations were the same for all of us. And we know that the content is always going to be wildly different because people are different and what they're teaching is different and the kids they're teaching is different. So we needed something to be the same because we knew in the past supervisors didn't really have a structure and they had very little support. So I've already started to talk about video and feedback, but thinking about the video and feedback process. So for the students, it means that your process becomes public, and all of us are, for the most part, we're working in public schools. And the idea of democratic public spaces means that they're scrutable, and there's no reason to have privacy or closed doors when you're in the process of learning, and that the process of learning to be a teacher means that you need somebody else's children present so you can have that experience. And that is that's a really like subtle but powerful place that I got to in terms of why we need to have video, because I had some supervisors that were not pleased at the idea of being recorded or recording themselves, because it wasn't me who was doing it. They had instructions on how to record themselves. And the question was, why? Why wouldn't you want to have this process? And yes, in the beginning, it may feel vulnerable, but we've gotten to a place where supervisors who have demonstrated that they value this work, they value the rationale behind our supervision process, they welcome being recorded. And we as a team, over these last few years, we've developed a team of people who have come into this space of work with BE3 asking to grow. So in addition to being able to coach and model and advise their load of student teachers, that they also share something in common with their student teachers is they are also in a process of reflection, revision, and next step action. And we use the exact same language with supervisors and student teachers, because we're trying to model through our practices what it means to have equitable practices. So there's nothing we ask our student teachers to do that we as supervisors aren't doing in a form that is relevant to our current role. Some of the feedback that we give each other as supervisors when viewing videos is really, one, it's foregrounded with a process of feedback giving that dispenses with the platitudes or the concerns about I might hurt your feelings. And that goes back to some of what our previous teams of supervisors spent a lot of energy worrying about. And it meant not getting down to what was real and right in front of us. And so what it means is we had to do a lot of relationship building, because in order to get critical feedback from a colleague, there needs to be a level of trust and respect. So part of our professional development is also humanized processes that incorporates not just the minutia of our roles, such as making sure our calendars are aligned or checking in with supervisors to make sure that their technology is up to date or they have the most updated version of a given platform or an app, but also to model the exact same types of engagements, protocols for speaking and listening, cognitive coaching protocols, modeling those same things so that we are also being challenged in our professional development. And when we get down to looking at each other's videos, the affect is so low and we're able to listen and hear. And for the most part, the types of things we notice is the types of the hesitations that we might make, or being asked to clarify why. So there's not so much, hey, I see you did this thing, but it's more like, I noticed you did this thing. Can you tell me more about it? Which is a very different approach than simply looking at a video waiting for something bad to happen or something that's unfavorable. But rather, supervisors have a habit of asking each other, what was the rationale or the thinking behind that choice? And that's exactly the type of questions we ask students when we sit with them and we look at maybe that 5 to 15-minute video with them. And I forgot to say, that's what we do. We watch the video together and we ask questions like that. I noticed you said this when this student spoke. Tell me more about that. So we're asking each other as supervisors, and we're also asking our student teachers to be engaged in a dialogue that pushes us to really get into that sticky place of, yeah, why did I do that? And we waste a lot of time when we enter into a debrief, an observation debrief with, that was awesome, you did a great job. And what we find is over time, both supervisors and student teachers really value the level of respect that is involved in looking closely at practice and finding the words we need to ask good questions that lay the ground for thoughtful, reflective responses that lead to accountability. Because we don't want folks just talking to each other. We want them to talk. And then the final piece of video feedback for supervisors and student teachers is that you have a final question that's, what is your next step based on what we just talked about? And you always, you expect an answer and you always get an answer. And it should be an actionable answer. And it's an answer that means you might be going back reteaching tomorrow. Or it might mean you go and apologize to that student because you really misstepped. Or for a supervisor, it might mean you go back and revise something you said because you didn't give enough information. Nonetheless, it's a deeply empowering process. But we want to make sure that reflection doesn't just stay stagnant with just people just revealing. But we want to make sure that our reflection and the way we are using video and feedback results in actions that get back to the reason why we started to look at changing supervision for BE3 in the first place, is that white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, all the things, the list of things named that are impacting all of us and our students every day, we needed to have a mechanism that was designed and calibrated to disrupting and replacing those things with life-affirming, useful, respectful, equitable, responsive processes. And that needed to be something that supervisors could say was their felt reality, which is the feedback that they give is they not only enjoy doing the coaching, they enjoy what they learn. They enjoy what it feels like to be able to keep growing and getting sharper and stronger and smarter, and also seeing how when they're feeling good about themselves in the work, they have the energy to really push their students in the work. So that was my roundabout answering of those four questions. But evidence we're still in the process of collecting, because I know that's really important, especially when folks are hearing about a model. And some of the evidence we have is the video itself. And then we do surveys between the student teacher and their supervisor once each semester. So it's both qualitative. It's so it gets at some numbers. It also gets at quality. So there's some narrative involved as much as there is, just kind of ticking off some boxes. But it's really important that we're able to look at what students are saying they want more of. And what we find is some of the evidence is that students are like, it's really hard to not just see yourself do ineffective teaching, but have a colleague witness it. And in that case, it's the supervisor. So evidence that we are on the right track and that this model is not set in stone and that I'm really committed to continue to evolve it. and do that in collaboration with the current team that makes up the BE3 supervision team, we're really on the right track, because we have the data that we're getting back is saying what we would expect it to say. This process is hard. It's challenging, but what's really coming out of that is that teachers are able to say, and it helped me move the needle, whatever distance that needle needed to be moved, to have the truth shared with you, and also to be given space to do your good thinking, but also have someone that holds you accountable to make those next step changes in your classroom practice, and also do some of the outside work that we all know we have to do, especially when we're really telling people we can't just keep reading about what it means to be anti-racist or able to create safe spaces for gender nonconforming students. These are just some of the things that come up. You have to feel it. So it's really an embodied experience, and we're doing a lot of shifting, and I would love to be able to talk about some of the really particular work we're doing around identity. But right now we are, this is an emergent process, and I think it would be dangerous to get real cozy with it just yet. But that we're now in a place where there's enough openness that anyone, be they student, BE3 instructor, or BE3 field supervisor, there's room and space and openness to be able to critique the process as well as build from it. So we're going to continue with the evidence, but I just want to go back and check that I touched on the questions. I talked, starting from the bottom, yes. What types of things do supervisors make note of? What evidence? What are the different aspects of PD? Okay. Right. So thank you for listening. And there may be some follow-up questions. And I welcome those, because the follow-up questions will actually give me really specific directions to take my responses. And I look forward to those questions. Thank you.